Everyone has a home, except me, the little girl whispered, clutching her teddy in the snow. A millionaire CEO froze, then took one step that changed everything. Before we begin, let us know where you're watching from, and stay with us through this unforgettable, heart-stirring story. Enjoy the story. Snow swept through downtown Chicago like a curtain of silence, muffling the honks and chatter of the evening commute. Streetlights blinked amber and red through flurries that stuck to windshields and boots. The sidewalks shimmered with slush, and breath turned to mist in the air. Inside a parked black Range Rover, the air was warm, the windows just slightly fogged, and Henry Whitmore sat behind the wheel, staring through the windshield without really seeing anything at all. He had just ended a call, another soulless conversation with a board member who wanted quarterly projections adjusted and layoffs considered. His Bluetooth still echoed faint traces of the voice as he tapped it off. A text from his assistant lit up the dashboard screen. Investor Gala tonight. Confirmed RSVP, need you there by 7. Henry didn't respond. Instead, he tapped the screen off and leaned back in his seat, eyes heavy. He wasn't tired exactly, just numb. From the outside, Henry Whitmore had it all. 40 years old, CEO of one of Chicago's largest real estate firms, net worth somewhere between disgusting and absurd. His name graced the plaques of hospitals and universities. His suits were tailored, his smile was magazine-polished, and his condo on the 57th floor of the Astoria was sleek and empty. That was the word that clung to him lately. Empty. He sighed and reached for his coffee, but it had gone cold. His gaze drifted lazily out the frosted windshield toward the bakery entrance, where the street lamp cast a soft golden glow against the falling snow. And that's when he saw her. She was small, couldn't have been more than 6, sitting on the edge of the sidewalk beneath the lamppost, knees tucked to her chest, hugging a worn brown teddy bear so tightly it looked as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. Her coat was far too thin, yellow and frayed at the seams. One of her boots was untied. Her cheeks were flushed with cold, her lips slightly parted, as if she were talking to the bear, or maybe to herself. Henry stared, puzzled. Was she waiting for someone? No adult in sight? No car idling nearby? Just her and the snow? He lowered the window just a few inches. The cold slapped his face instantly, sharp and sobering. "Hey," he called gently. "You okay?" The little girl looked up. Her eyes were large, dark, steady, not afraid, not surprised, just tired. She held his gaze like she was used to looking at people much bigger than her. Then she whispered, voice barely audible beneath the hush of snowfall, "Everyone has a home, except me." The words hit him like a brick. Something in his chest tensed. Without meaning to, he clenched the steering wheel, the leather biting into his palm. The warmth inside the car suddenly felt like a lie. He had everything: homes in 3 cities, luxury hotels, staff, private elevators. And yet, in this moment, he'd never felt so small. The little girl stood up, brushing snow off her teddy's ears. She didn't wait for a response. She just turned and started walking down the sidewalk, toward the alley behind the bakery. Henry hesitated. Everything in him screamed for order, caution, distance. This wasn't his business. He didn't do stray children or sidewalk confessions. He did mergers, deadlines, silence. "Get a grip, Henry," he muttered. But his hand was already reaching for the door handle. He stepped out. The wind caught his coat instantly, whipping flakes into his face. His polished shoes sank into slush, but he followed her. Past the glowing bakery windows, past the cracked concrete curb, down a narrow side street lined with garbage bins and rusted fences. She didn't look back, but she didn't run either. She walked like someone who had nothing to hide and nowhere else to go. Henry caught up slowly, matching her small footsteps. "What's your name?" he asked, trying to keep his voice from cracking. "Nora," she said without turning around. "You shouldn't be out here alone, Nora." "I'm not," she replied. "I'm going home." "Where's that?" She pointed at a metal door tucked beneath a staircase. No porch, no light, just a narrow entry beneath a set of rusted apartment steps. "That's where my aunt lives," she said. "I live there now, too." "Kinda." Henry looked at the door, then back at her. "Does she know you're out here?" Nora shrugged. "She works late. I don't think she saw me leave." And then, as if remembering something important, she turned to him and asked, "Are you someone who keeps walking, or someone who helps?" He didn't know what to say. Not long ago, he would have kept walking. Not from cruelty, just from habit. From years of being detached, practical. But this little girl had whispered 6 words and cracked something inside him. Something he didn't know was still alive. "I guess we're about to find out," he said quietly. She gave a tiny nod, like that answer would do for now, then pushed open the heavy basement door. Warm, stale air poured out. Henry hesitated only a second before stepping in behind her. And just like that, his life took a turn he never saw coming. The hallway inside the building was dimly lit and smelled faintly of mildew and fried onions. The walls were yellowed from age, and the tiles under Henry's expensive leather shoes stuck faintly with every step. Nora didn't seem to notice. She led him with the casual ease of someone who'd walked these halls 100 times. At the end of the corridor, she stopped in front of a dented beige door and knocked twice. No answer. She pulled a key from a string around her neck, unlocked the door, and pushed it open with both hands. The hinges groaned. The apartment was small, cramped, really. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, casting a soft, tired light over everything. There was a worn couch with a crocheted blanket draped over one arm. A space heater rattled in the corner, but didn't seem to be doing much. The floor was linoleum, curling at the edges, and next to a small round table covered in art supplies and crayon drawings stood a young woman with paint smudged on her wrist and exhaustion in her eyes. She blinked when she saw Henry in the doorway. Nora?" the woman said slowly, her voice husky with fatigue. "Who is this?" "This is Henry," Nora said simply, setting her teddy bear down on the couch. "He followed me." "I didn't follow her," Henry said, raising a hand gently. "She was sitting out in the cold. I was concerned." The woman stepped forward cautiously, arms crossed, protective. She was younger than Henry expected, maybe 30, tops. Tired, but sharp-eyed. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she wore a threadbare hoodie with a faded band logo. "I'm Claire," she said finally. "Her aunt. Sorry for the mess. We weren't expecting company." Henry glanced around. He'd been in hotel lobbies that cost more than this entire building. Yet something about this space felt more grounded, more real. He saw a few framed photos on the wall. Nora as a toddler, a woman with her same dark eyes. Her mother, he assumed. Claire followed his gaze. "That's my sister, Nora's mom. She passed 6 years ago. Complications during birth. Nora's dad took off before she was even born." Henry nodded slowly. "I'm sorry." Claire shrugged, the way people do when grief is already old news. I've raised her since then, working double shifts at the diner, some side gigs painting. It's not glamorous, but we get by. She said she didn't have a home, Henry said softly. Claire looked away. We've been moved around a lot. The rent here's cheap and they let me pay late. That's the best I can do right now. Nora had wandered to the kitchenette and pulled out a small cookie tin from the cabinet. She opened it and looked inside. We still have one, she said brightly. Then she crossed the room and held the cookie out to Henry. It's cinnamon. He didn't move at first. Then quietly, he knelt down to her level, took the cookie in both hands, and said, "Thank you." Nora smiled and turned back to her teddy bear. Claire watched the exchange, her arms falling to her sides. "Can I get you something?" Claire offered awkwardly. "Tea? We've got tap water." Henry shook his head. "I'm not here to intrude." Claire tilted her head, studying him. "You're dressed like someone who's never had to think twice about hot water. So, why are you here?" Henry exhaled slowly. He wasn't even sure himself. "I saw her sitting alone in the snow. Something about what she said just stayed with me." Claire nodded once. She's good at that, saying things that stick. After a few more minutes of polite conversation, Henry stood. "I should let you both rest." Claire followed him to the door. Nora had climbed onto the couch and curled under the blanket with her bear. "Thanks for checking on her," Claire said. "Most people just keep walking." Henry opened the door but paused, glancing back. "She asked me if I was someone who helps. I didn't know how to answer." Claire smiled faintly. "Maybe now you do." The hallway felt colder on the way out. The snow had thickened. As Henry stepped back into his SUV, the leather was still warm, but his hands were shaking slightly. He sat in silence for a while, the engine humming quietly beneath him. Back in his office tower, the lobby was marble and glass, pristine and sterile. The elevator chimed softly as it took him to the penthouse floor. His assistant had left a stack of reports on his desk. His espresso had gone cold. He sat down, opened his laptop, and stared at the screen without typing a single word. His thoughts kept drifting, to the space heater that barely worked, to the cracked window stuffed with an old towel, to Nora's yellow coat, far too thin for the weather, and her voice. "Everyone has a home, except me." He pushed the laptop aside and leaned back. A voice in his head, firm and logical, whispered, "This isn't your life, Henry. You don't do messy. You don't do kids." But then another voice, smaller but growing louder, asked, "What if that's the problem?" The next morning, Henry stood by his office window watching the snowfall. He hadn't slept much. Something about the silence of the apartment, the stillness of that little girl's eyes, haunted him. He turned away from the glass, grabbed his coat, and said aloud to no one, "Just one more visit." It was still early when Henry pulled up in front of the same crumbling apartment building, a brown grocery bag balanced in one hand and a space heater tucked under the other arm. The snow had turned to slush, gray and heavy, pooling around the curbs. His driver offered to walk with him, but Henry waved him off. He wanted to do this alone. The hallway smelled the same: old cooking oil, damp carpet, and something faintly metallic, like rusted pipes. The light above the unit flickered. He knocked gently this time. Claire opened the door in an oversized sweater, her hair still tied up in a bun. For a moment she looked surprised, almost unsure whether to let him in. "I brought breakfast," Henry said simply, holding up the bag. "And this might help." He tilted the heater toward her. She stared at him for a beat, then stepped aside. "You're persistent. I'll give you that." Nora came racing from the back room, barefoot, a crayon clutched in one hand. "You came back," Henry smiled. "Told you I would." The apartment was no warmer than the day before. The space heater rattled on a weak hum near the couch, but the cold clung to the air like a second skin. Henry set his heater down and plugged it into the nearest outlet. The whir was immediate, stronger. Claire watched him with one eyebrow raised. "You didn't have to do that," she muttered. "I know," he said, not looking at her. "But I wanted to." She didn't argue. They sat around the tiny kitchen table while Nora devoured a banana muffin like it was the first real food she'd seen in days. Henry passed her a small bottle of orange juice. Claire poured instant coffee into chipped mugs. It wasn't exactly the kind of meeting Henry Whitmore was used to, but somehow it felt more honest than anything he'd experienced in years. When Nora scampered off to the corner of the living room where her coloring books were scattered, Henry's gaze drifted toward the refrigerator. His eyes caught on a crinkled sheet of paper held up by a flower-shaped magnet. It was a drawing, a child's drawing, of course, but what stopped him wasn't the crude lines or uneven stars. It was the content. 3 stick figures under a navy blue sky filled with yellow stars. One had long hair and a dress, Claire, no doubt. One was smaller, arms outstretched. Nora. And the third? A tall figure in a boxy suit, with a square head, marked with the letter H. Claire noticed his gaze. "She drew that after you left yesterday," she said, her voice softer now. "She thinks fast. Feels faster." Henry didn't speak for a long moment. Something about seeing himself in that imaginary sky, under stars he didn't earn, undid him. It wasn't pity he felt. It was something more fragile. Belonging. "I haven't been in a kid's drawing since—" He trailed off. The memory was too distant to pull forward. Nora turned around and said, "Do you want to see my book?" Henry smiled. "I'd love to." She ran to a small bookshelf by the wall, really just a milk crate flipped sideways, and pulled out a worn sketchbook with bent corners. She handed it to him like it was treasure. He opened it slowly. Inside were dozens of drawings. Some were messy, some beautiful in their innocence. Most showed homes, houses on hills, houses by lakes, houses with big windows and warm lights inside. Some had just her and a dog. Others showed 3 or 4 people. A mom, a girl, and often a tall, suited man. He kept showing up, sometimes faceless, sometimes smiling. "She draws homes she's never had," Claire said behind him. "Sometimes I think it's her way of trying to build one for herself." Henry flipped to the last page. It was blank. "She said that one's for later," Claire added. "When she knows how it ends." Henry closed the book gently, feeling the weight of it settle in his hands. "May I hang on to this? Just for a little while?" Claire looked surprised. "Why?" "Because," he said quietly, "if I'm going to help, I want to understand what home means to her." Claire nodded just once. There was something unspoken in her expression, a softening, a surrender. Maybe trust wasn't there yet, but something close. Recognition, maybe. He stood to leave, and Nora rushed over, hugging his waist, her arms barely wrapped halfway around, but the gesture was whole. He crouched and returned the hug. "Thank you for breakfast," she whispered. "Thank you for letting me share it with you." As he reached the door, Claire said, "You know she's going to expect you tomorrow, right?" Henry turned back, hand on the doorknob. "Then I'll be here." He stepped out into the hallway, and for a moment, just stood there. The cold hadn't reached him yet. His heart was still warm with paper stars and crayon skies. Later that night, back in his glass-walled office overlooking the skyline, Henry pulled out Nora's sketchbook. He flipped again to the blank page at the back. Then, slowly, he picked up a pen, drew a tiny house beneath a sky, and beside it, just one word: hope. The next time Henry returned, it wasn't with muffins or just a heater. It was with keys. Claire stared at him from the doorway, arms crossed, paint smudged on her forearm, suspicion plain on her face. Keys to what? A warm, safe apartment, Henry said calmly, holding out a manila envelope. It's in a building my company owns. 2 bedrooms, fully furnished, heat that works, secure entry. You'd be upstairs from a library and 2 blocks from a park. And the school Nora's zoned for? It ranks in the top 10. Claire didn't take the envelope. We're not charity cases, she said. Her voice wasn't hostile, just tired, guarded. I'm not offering charity, Henry replied. I'm offering a reset. From the living room, Nora peeked around the corner, teddy bear in hand. Did he bring more muffins? Henry smiled. Not today, but I brought something better. Claire didn't move. She looked from the keys to her niece, then back at Henry. He didn't pressure her. He just placed the envelope gently on the table near the door and stepped back. You can say no, he said softly. But I've been thinking about her drawings, the homes. She shouldn't have to imagine what safety feels like. She should live it. It took another full day before Claire called. We'll try it, she said simply. Just try. By the end of the week, they had moved in. The new apartment was on the 3rd floor of a red brick building with big windows and freshly painted trim. It wasn't lavish, but it was clean, bright, and quiet. Nora's bedroom had a full-sized bed, a bookshelf, and a window that caught the morning sun. Henry arrived on the 2nd day with a long cardboard box tucked under his arm. Claire raised an eyebrow. You moving in? Not exactly, he said. I brought a surprise for Nora. He found her in her new room, arranging her books in color order. She looked up when he entered, her eyes already glowing. Close your eyes, he told her. She did. He opened the box and pulled out a pack of glow-in-the-dark stars, then stepped up on a chair and began placing them across the ceiling in constellations. When she opened her eyes, she gasped. It's my sky. Henry smiled. Now you'll always have stars above you, even when it rains. She flung her arms around him, her tiny body fitting perfectly in the crook of his neck. Claire stood in the hallway watching, silently pressing her palm to her chest. Her eyes shimmered, but she didn't speak. Over the next few days, things settled into a rhythm Henry never saw coming. He rearranged his calendar to walk Nora home from school twice a week. On one of those walks, she talked about spelling words and said she wanted to be a scientist, but also an astronaut and maybe a dancer. Claire was finding her smile again, too. She'd picked up part-time work at a local nonprofit art studio, helping kids paint murals after school. Henry stopped, by once, unannounced. He stood in the doorway and watched her for a while. How she laughed, how she leaned down to show a child how to blend color, how she looked like someone who belonged. When she saw him, she looked startled, but not annoyed. I didn't know CEOs had time for sidewalk murals, she said playfully, wiping blue paint from her wrist. Some do, he replied. Especially the ones with better priorities. They shared coffee on a bench outside after her shift. It was quiet, and for once, neither of them tried to fill the silence with small talk. It just felt okay. One afternoon, Henry got a call about a major investor who was threatening to pull out of a land deal. Normally, he'd have rushed to the office, suited up, fought fires. But that day, he was sitting on the floor of Nora's room helping her cut stars from yellow paper for a school project. He stared at the phone buzzing in his hand, then turned it off. Nora looked up. "Aren't you going to answer it?" "Nope," he said, handing her the scissors. "They'll wait. This is more important." She beamed. Claire watched from the doorway, arms folded but smiling. Later that night, after a quiet dinner of grilled cheese and tomato soup, simple but shared, Henry helped Nora brush her teeth, read her a story, and tucked her into bed beneath her ceiling full of stars. She looked up at him, sleepy-eyed, the softest frown on her lips. "Will you still be here when I wake up?" Henry's breath caught. He reached out and brushed her hair behind her ear. "Yes, kiddo," he said. "I will." He sat beside her for a while after she fell asleep, just watching the glow in the dark stars flicker overhead. And for the first time in years, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Spring broke gently over the city, softening the cold edges of winter. Trees began to bloom, sidewalks filled with stroller wheels and laughter, and the air held that subtle sense of beginning again. Inside their warm apartment, it felt like the season had taken root early. Nora was thriving, her cheeks rosy, her drawings more colorful than ever, now filled with swirling galaxies and people holding hands under skies filled with stars. Henry had become more than a visitor. He was part of the routine now. He walked Nora to school on Mondays, brought her homemade cocoa on Thursdays, and taught her how to fold paper airplanes on weekends. Claire had loosened too, like a string that had been wound too tight for too long. She smiled easier, laughed louder. They ate dinner together once a week, just the three of them, at the small kitchen table that Henry had ordered from a local woodworker, claiming IKEA just didn't cut it. It was during one of those nights, as Henry cleared the dishes and Nora washed them with bubbly enthusiasm, that Claire paused at the counter, her gaze lingering on the two of them. "She doesn't call you Dad," she said quietly, "but she's starting to treat you like one." Henry looked at her, water dripping from his hands. "Is that okay?" Claire hesitated, then nodded. "I think it might be exactly what she needs." But just when life began to settle into something close to beautiful, the knock came. It was late, well past dinner, and the sound startled them. Claire opened the door cautiously, only for the color to drain from her face. There stood Jason. His hair was slicked back in an attempt to look put together, and he wore a cheap suit that didn't quite fit. He held a manila folder under one arm and a smug half-smile on his face. "Well," he said, scanning the room behind Claire. "Looks like you've been busy, sis." Claire's voice was ice. "What do you want, Jason?" "I want what's mine," he said smoothly. "My daughter." Henry stood from the table slowly. Nora clutched the back of his shirt, shrinking behind him. Her eyes were wide. She didn't know him, not really. He was just a name she'd heard in adult whispers. "You can't be serious," Claire snapped. "You left before she was born." Jason shrugged. "I've changed. I've got a stable job, legal representation." Claire laughed bitterly. "You mean you found a shady lawyer and shaved?" Jason's eyes narrowed, shifting toward Henry. "And who's this? Daddy Warbucks?" Henry didn't flinch. "You need to leave, now." Jason smirked. "I'll be back, with a court order. Let's see what the judge thinks about a billionaire playing house with someone else's kid." He turned and walked down the hallway, the sound of his shoes echoing like a threat. That night, Nora couldn't sleep. She lay curled in her bed, stars glowing above her, but her eyes were shadowed. Henry sat beside her, holding her hand. "Do I have to go with him?" she whispered. "No," Henry said firmly. "No one is taking you anywhere. Even if he says he's my dad?" Henry swallowed the tight knot in his throat. Being a dad isn't about who shows up last. It's about who never leaves. She nodded softly, then turned into his chest. He stayed with her until she fell asleep. The next morning, Henry called a private investigator. By noon, he had a thick file on Jason. His stable job was working as a middleman for a local payday loan operation, a front for illegal narcotics distribution. He had skipped parole check-ins more than once and had been questioned in connection with a stolen vehicle. Claire read the report in silence, her hands shaking slightly. "He's dangerous. He's also being watched," Henry said calmly. "I've contacted a family law attorney. We're going to be ready." Still, Jason's shadow loomed. Nora's drawings turned darker. Stick figures with jagged edges, houses missing windows, a little girl hiding under a tree. She started wetting the bed again. She chewed her nails. She flinched at loud noises. One afternoon, while Henry was at his office reviewing contracts, his assistant buzzed in. "There's something in your private mail bin. It's unusual." He found it waiting in a small white envelope, no return address. Inside, a photo of Nora playing in the park, clearly taken without their knowledge. Henry's blood ran cold. He handed the photo to his lawyer and doubled security on Claire and Nora's building that same day. He also ordered school pickup changes and began personally walking Nora to and from the front door every time. A few days later, Henry came home late from a meeting to find Nora sitting at his kitchen island with a coloring pencil in hand. She was alone, Claire napping after a long shift. She slid a piece of paper across the counter toward him. It was a drawing of the three of them, her, Claire, and Henry, standing outside the new apartment. But this time, Henry's figure had something scrawled under it in red crayon. "Dad?" Henry stared at the page, heart caught in his throat. His name hadn't been written, it had been wondered. He blinked hard. Then he folded the drawing, placed it carefully in his coat pocket, and whispered, "I'll earn it, sweetheart. I promise." The courthouse was colder than it should have been. Not from temperature, but from the sterile hum of fluorescent lights and the echo of distant heels on marble floors. Henry sat beside Claire on a worn wooden bench outside courtroom 3C, Nora between them, her small hand gripping his tightly. She wore a soft blue dress with tiny white stars, her favorite. But this morning, she didn't twirl or smile. She sat still, knees pressed together, her eyes fixed on the double doors ahead, like they might swallow her whole. Claire hadn't said much since they arrived. Her knuckles were white around the edge of a file folder containing years of school records, doctor's notes, and photos of Nora's life. The quiet proof of a love that had never wavered. Henry, dressed in a tailored navy suit, felt overdressed for something so raw. He'd faced federal inquiries, merger tribunals, shareholder battles worth billions, but nothing had made his stomach churn like this. Then came the click of polished shoes and the telltale scrape of smugness. Jason walked in, flanked by a wiry man in a cheap gray suit. His lawyer. He wore a fresh haircut and cologne that tried too hard. When he spotted them, he grinned like this was a business deal he was already winning. Claire stiffened. Henry placed a steady hand on her arm. "He's not getting her." Jason sauntered toward them and looked down at Nora. "Hi there, Princess," he said with mock warmth. "Remember me?" Nora leaned closer to Henry without answering. "She remembers who stays," Henry said coldly. A bailiff called them into the courtroom before anything else could be said. The room itself was simple. Wood paneling, a judge's bench, an American flag limp against the far wall. But to Nora, it felt like a battlefield. She clutched her bear to her chest as they took their seats. Jason's attorney stood first, spinning a tale of reform. He described Jason's desire to reconnect, his commitment to family, and waved around a newly signed lease for a one-bedroom apartment. "Mr. Moore has the legal right to pursue a relationship with his biological daughter," the attorney said. "The law does not favor replacement." Claire's attorney countered with a detailed timeline of Jason's absence, a list of criminal records, and the photo of Nora taken without consent, evidence of stalking. But it was Henry who the courtroom turned to next. When he stood, the room fell oddly silent. He didn't speak like a lawyer. He didn't read from notes. He spoke like a man who had lived every word. "Family isn't made by blood," he said. "It's made by presence, by being there at bedtime, through school pickups, through bad dreams and spilled cereal and storybooks. Nora asked me once if I would still be there when she woke up, and every day since I've answered that question not with words, but with action." He glanced at the judge. Jason Moore had every chance to be her father, but he didn't come for her birthday. He didn't call when she had the flu. He didn't show up for anything that mattered. Now he wants credit for biology. But biology didn't wipe her tears when she woke up screaming last week. The courtroom was quiet. Even Jason didn't smirk now. Then the judge asked gently, "Would the child like to speak?" Claire opened her mouth to object, but Nora stood. She walked to the front, bear in one hand, and faced the bench with shaking knees. Her voice was soft but unwavering. "I don't remember him," she said, nodding toward Jason. "He never came for me." She looked back at Henry, her voice cracking. "But he did. He came. And he stayed. He brings me cocoa and stars for my ceiling. He listens. He doesn't yell. And I feel safe with him. Like I belong." The judge leaned forward, expression unreadable. "And what do you want, Nora?" Nora wiped her nose with her sleeve and whispered, "I want to stay home." Jason's lawyer tried to object. But just then, a man in plain clothes approached the bench. He handed a file to the judge and leaned in with quiet urgency. The judge's brow lifted slightly. He opened the file, flipped through, and then looked up at Jason. "Mr. Moore," he said firmly, "I've just received confirmation that you are currently under investigation in a narcotics trafficking case involving fentanyl-based pills and laundering through a known loan shark. Is that correct?" Jason's face went pale. No one's filed anything." The judge slammed the folder shut. "No need. It's enough for me to render a decision." The courtroom held its breath. In light of Mr. Moore's criminal exposure, absence from the child's life, and clear psychological risk to her well-being, full custody shall remain with Ms. Reynolds. Mr. Whitmore will be formally recognized as a designated guardian and trusted figure of authority in the child's life, should any emergency arise. All visitation rights for Mr. Moore are suspended indefinitely pending criminal proceedings. Claire gasped. Nora dropped her bear and rushed toward Henry. He caught her mid-jump, lifting her in his arms. She sobbed against his shoulder, not from fear this time, but from release. Jason stood frozen, fists clenched, until the bailiff stepped closer. He turned and stormed out without another word. Outside the courtroom, Claire collapsed onto the bench, head in her hands. Henry sat beside her, Nora in his lap. For a moment, no one said anything. Then Claire looked up. "I don't know what we would have done without you." Henry looked down at Nora, still clinging to his coat. "You don't have to," he said. "You'll never have to again." The days following the court decision passed like the first breeze after a long storm. Quiet, cautious, but full of something new. Peace. For the first time in months, Nora didn't check the hallway twice before bed. Claire stopped waking at every sound in the night. And Henry, well, Henry felt more at home in the world than he ever had in his penthouse with skyline views. A few weeks later, they moved again, but this time, not because they had to. Henry had personally overseen the renovation of a top-floor unit in a historic brick building near the city's botanical gardens. It wasn't flashy or cold like his old condo. This place had warmth in its bones. Crown molding, wide windows, and the kind of kitchen you could spill flour in without anyone getting mad. The moment Claire and Nora stepped inside, something in them visibly relaxed. It didn't just look like a home. It felt like one. Nora's new bedroom was a dream come true. The walls were painted a soft lavender, with shelves for her books and art supplies, and a reading nook by the window with cushions and fairy lights. But it was the ceiling that made her gasp. Above her bed, tiny fiber-optic lights glowed like stars, scattered across a deep navy sky. Some blinked, some shimmered, and all of them belonged to her. Henry stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets, watching her spin beneath the glow. "Is it real?" she whispered. "It's yours," he said. Claire appeared behind him, resting her chin briefly on his shoulder. "She's going to remember this forever." Henry turned to her. "So will I." Their life together didn't become perfect. It became normal. The kind of normal most people take for granted. Grocery runs, mismatched socks, spilled juice. Henry learned how to braid a 6-year-old's hair, after 3 YouTube tutorials and a very patient Nora, and Claire began painting again in a sunlit corner of the living room. She sold 3 pieces in a local gallery show that month, and Henry was there for all of it, cheering like he was at the Super Bowl. Sunday mornings became pancake days. Nora called them galaxy breakfasts because they'd use blueberries and whipped cream to make constellations on the plates. Claire laughed more, and when she did, Henry would pause whatever he was doing, emails, phone calls, reading stock updates, just to listen. One day, Nora brought home a form for a Parents' and Guardians' Day event at school. She handed it to Henry like it was no big deal, but the way she held her breath while he read it said otherwise. "Think you could make it?" she asked. Henry looked at the date, then at his calendar. A board meeting, a quarterly earnings call, a video shoot for shareholders. "I'll be there," he said without a blink. The look on Nora's face made the entire boardroom rescheduling worth it. At the event, Nora introduced him to her classmates as "my kinda dad," but not in a weird way. The kids giggled. Henry smiled. One of the other parents leaned over and said, "She really loves you, you know." He just nodded, because he did know. That evening, Claire printed out a photo from the school event. Nora grinning, Henry crouched beside her, both wearing paper star crowns. She framed it and hung it in the hallway beside their front door. It was their first family photo. That night, as Henry sat reading on the couch, Claire curled beside him, head resting lightly against his shoulder. The TV hummed softly in the background, but they weren't really watching. In Nora's room, the stars blinked above her as she whispered to her bear and drifted off to sleep. Claire spoke quietly, her words barely louder than the ticking of the kitchen clock. "You know, she told me the other day that she feels lucky now." Henry closed the book, marked his page. "She deserves to feel lucky." "You made that happen," Claire said. He looked at her, eyes steady. "No, we did." Claire smiled, brushing his hand with hers. "I used to think there were only two kinds of people in the world, the ones who leave and the ones who get left behind. But maybe there's a third kind, the ones who stay, even when it's hard." Henry leaned in, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead. "I'm not going anywhere," he whispered. Later that night, as he passed by Nora's room to turn off the hall light, he heard her voice through the door, muffled but clear. "Do you think this could last forever?" she asked sleepily. Claire's voice followed a moment later, gentle and firm. "I think, sweetheart, this is just the beginning." The morning the news broke, Henry was in the kitchen flipping pancakes while Nora drew swirls of syrup galaxies on her plate. Claire, still in her robe, sipped coffee near the window, the sun catching in her hair like threads of gold. The air was peaceful, filled with the soft rhythm of domestic joy. It had taken months to reach this calm, to breathe without fear, to trust in something lasting. But all of it stilled the moment Henry's phone buzzed. It was a short call. His attorney didn't waste time. Jason had been arrested again. This time it wasn't just failure to appear or some back-alley loan scheme. He'd been caught in a DEA sting, distributing fentanyl-laced pills through a storefront posing as a check-cashing business. With prior convictions and probation violations, the judge didn't hesitate. 15 years, no parole. Henry hung up the phone and turned toward Claire. She could tell from his face before he said a word. "It's over," he said. "Case closed. He's gone for a long time." Claire let out a slow, stunned breath, her shoulders sinking as if a weight she didn't realize she still carried had finally been set down. In the living room, Nora was humming to herself as she colored in a new sketch. Henry crossed the room, knelt in front of her, and took her small hand. "Sweetheart," he said gently, "we got news about Jason." She looked up, eyes steady, waiting. "He's not coming back," Henry said. "Ever again." Nora was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded and turned her drawing toward him, a picture of 3 people standing under a sky full of stars. "Good," she whispered. "Now we can stay happy." Spring came in soft waves after that. Warm breezes carried the smell of magnolia and cut grass. The botanical garden across the street bloomed in color, and birds returned to nest in the rafters above their windows. The darkness of the last year was behind them. It didn't disappear, but it no longer ruled them. It was Nora who asked first. She'd been watching Claire and Henry dance in the kitchen, music spilling from the old speaker, pancakes forgotten on the stove. She tilted her head and said, "Are you two going to get married or what?" Claire had blushed. Henry only smiled. They didn't wait long. In early June, beneath the canopy of the same garden they walked through every Sunday, Henry and Claire exchanged vows in front of a small group of people who had become their quiet village. Claire's co-workers from the studio, Henry's assistant and driver, Nora's teacher, and the neighbor from downstairs, who always brought soup when someone had a cold. Nora stood between them as the flower girl, her dress white and shimmering with sewn-on stars. She tossed petals into the wind and giggled every time one landed in Henry's hair. When the vows were said, and Henry leaned in to kiss Claire, it was Nora who tugged their hands together first. That night, back at the apartment, the living room was filled with balloons and the scent of vanilla cake. Claire had kicked off her shoes and pulled her hair loose, dancing barefoot with Nora to old Ella Fitzgerald records. Henry stood at the edge of the room, a drink in his hand, the ring on his finger catching the light, and thought, "This is it. This is what I never knew I wanted." Later, after everyone had gone and the city had gone quiet, he peeked into Nora's room. The fiber-optic stars on her ceiling glowed in gentle pulses. She was awake, tucked beneath the covers, waiting. "I have something for you," she said, lifting a folded piece of paper from her nightstand. Henry stepped in, sat at the edge of her bed, and unfolded it slowly. It was a drawing. A house. 3 people holding hands beneath a sky full of stars. She looked up at him and whispered, "Now we all have a home." He couldn't speak. A tear slid silently down his cheek as he reached for her hand. "You gave it to us first, sweetheart." She smiled sleepily. "You just made it real." He tucked her in gently, brushed the hair from her forehead, and kissed the top of her head. When he stepped out into the hallway, Claire was there, barefoot and smiling, holding 2 mugs of tea. "She give you the picture?" she asked. Henry nodded. "Framed it in my mind already." They walked to the living room together, the soft laughter of Nora behind them, the stars above her bed still glowing like they'd been hung there by love itself. Claire rested her head on Henry's shoulder, and the 2 of them stood silently, looking at the picture Nora had pinned to the wall earlier that week. Above it, in her looping handwriting, read, "Family isn't where you start. It's where you choose to stay." And in that little apartment full of stars, art supplies, and second chances, they stayed. If this story stirred something in your heart, if it reminded you that love often comes wrapped in the most unexpected moments, then we invite you to stay. Subscribe to Restoring Tales for more tales that touch your heart, heal your soul, and remind you that even on the hardest days, tomorrow is still a gift. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.